Hi there. Have you ever given your preschooler a tablet or an iPad or a phone to calm them down or to entertain them while you're shopping or making a meal? Last week, I was on radio and we talked about a study about the effect of screen time on preschoolers ages 3.5 to 5.5. There was quite a reaction. So I thought you would be interested in this information too. For those of you who don't know me, I'm Wynne Harwood, and I have worked for 30 plus years with thousands of parents, and now I'm working to create a supportive community of like-minded parents online, and I'm so glad that you're here. I will get to this more recent study in a minute, but first let me share that there was an earlier study on the effects of screen time on toddlers, children under the age of 2. What they found was that any amount of screen time that toddlers had caused them more stress, more frustration, and they had more temper tantrums. Now, it's normal for toddlers to have temper tantrums. All toddlers have temper tantrums because that part of their brain that regulates emotion, the prefrontal lobe here, it's not well developed in children under the age of 2. But what we don't want is more temper tantrums. The researchers wrote that the use of e-sitters, electronic sitters, that's what they called it, is counterproductive because it causes more stress and more temper tantrums. And so this isn't good for the toddlers or for parents. It doesn't work to soothe them, which is important to know, I think. Put in the comments how you feel about what I'm saying here. Do you think it's helpful? And if you have any questions, let me know in the comments. I'd really appreciate that because I do read all the comments. The American Association of Pediatrics has recommended that children under 2 spend no time on screens. And that brings us to the more recent study of the effects of screen time on 3.5 to 5.5-year-olds. They tracked how much time these kids spent on screens, and they also tracked their emotional status. Some of these kids owned their tablets, and so the amount of time they spent on was up to them, left up to them. Children who were 3.5 spent an average of 6.5 hours on screen. And by the time they were 5.5, they were spending 7.5 hours. So there was an increase of 1 hour over those 2 years. And guess what they found? The more time these kids spent on screens, the more stressed they felt, the more frustrated they felt, and the more outbursts they had. The researchers said adding 1 hour of screen time at 3.5 corresponded with a significant jump in the child's anger and frustration levels by the time they were 4.5. Levels of emotional stress experienced at 4.5 led these kids to spend even more time on the screens to relieve their stress. And in my practice, parents have told me that when their kids are spending that much time at that age, spending that much time on screens, they're spending less time socializing. This I find really disturbing because children between the ages of 3.5 and 5.5, the development of their executive functioning has started, and they need to learn how to self-regulate. What we mean by self-regulation is that they learn how to regulate their impulses, how to delay gratification, and they learn how to tolerate frustration, which are the 3 things that toddlers are unable to do. But here we see that brain development is actually delayed because of the time spent on the screen, not only in terms of developing self-regulation, but in terms of learning social skills. This is important to know. How much time should kids spend on screens? I recommend that you delay screen time as long as you can, definitely not before the age of 2. After the age of 2, just gradually let them go on the screen and increase it by 15-minute increments, and then they take a break. And gradually what the American Association of Pediatricians recommends is that children between the ages of 2 and 12 spend an hour a week on screen time. That doesn't include time spent on education, especially during COVID, right? Kids spent more time on their screens. So the Academy of Pediatricians weren't talking about that. They were talking about leisure time spent on screens. And this study did not include time that you spend with your child on a screen. You may be looking at a map on the screen to look at places where you'll be going on your vacation. That's a time to connect. And connection is what our kids really need. Let me know in the comments what you think of this study. And do you find it difficult to limit your child's screen time? Let me know. In addition to limiting screen time, there are two other things that kids need to learn self-regulation. And I'm currently working on a video to talk about that in more detail. I invite you to click on the subscribe button. And if you click on the bell, you'll be notified of my next video. Until then,